This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Season 19, Dreams and Nightmares. This is the prologue. The war with the International Trafficking Organization has been won. Sincere's membership with Life had expired. However, he still had an ace in the hole. He left his best friend, AG, with instructions that he was to follow if he didn't hear from Sincere within a set time frame. And that time was about to be up. As a result of Sincere's death, there's a new sheriff in town. Saint is a free and new man. The man who'd been known for very few words had a whole lot to say at the round table. And when he returned to Miami, his sister Chantal was still unconscious, and his woman was ready to ride. Idra's search for his successor had come to an end. The death of his nephew Stanley had left him in quite a pickle. He hadn't been sitting around twiddling his thumbs, though. He'd been taking care of his woman, the Queen Mother, and looking out for her children and her grandchildren. He'd ensured that Ron signed the divorce papers that Anya had presented him with, and then dispatched of him and his lover came. When Anya, Stephanie, True, Rennie, and the Queen Mother beat the brakes off of them and provided Michael and Tamara with a safe haven in St. Lucia. His support, mentorship, and generosity had been handsomely rewarded. When Michael approached him about being his successor, the full changing of the guard was on the horizon for the Notorious Five Families. Stephanie is head of the Lopez organization out of Puerto Rico. Selima is head of the Baptiste organization out of Trinidad. Saint is head of the St. James organization, also out of Trinidad. Michael is head of the Charles organization out of St. Lucia. And Zora is head of the Garcia organization out of Colombia. Yes, Big Wood had given his approval for his oldest sister to succeed their second cousin, Alejandro, in the family business. And retirement did not mean that he was done working. It just meant he had two new jobs. He'd be training both his sister and his nephew, Michael. He'd also be raising his son, while his soon-to-be wife, True, served as Stephanie's right hand. The Lopez organization was the head family in the Notorious Five Families, but the head position was going to be up for grabs, because each head in training could inherit their seats, but no one could inherit the head seat. That had to be earned. And what's a season of bedtime stories, grown-up edition, without friendships that are forced to change, marriages that are on the rocks, engagements, pregnancies, arrests, and deaths, all of which can be dreams and nightmares. Bashian Adam, also known as Brutal Bosch, had earned his name in and off the field. He was very much so a stereotype. Light skin, curly hair, light eyes, tatted up. He attracted women of all kinds, all races, all creeds, all ages, and all careers. And he'd been with them all. He'd also been known to be an outstanding lover. And the only time that he played with women's feelings was when it was a part of the job. In his personal life, he kept it all the way real. What you saw was what you got. He was there for a good time, not a long time. And then he met True Joy Burton, the first woman who'd captivated his attention and his heart. Since he lost the love of his life while he was in the field, he spent 2 years in hiding, waiting for it to be safe for him to return to civilization. Thanks to Big Wood, his name had been cleared and he was able to return to work in his life. Unfortunately for him, when he did, his girl and the baby they'd been expecting were both deceased. He carried that pain with him everywhere he went, and it was the main reason why he never let anybody get too close. Then he found himself on Angela and Stephanie's estate in Denver for months, alone with Big Wood's girl. Big Wood had faked his own death, and True was pregnant with their son. She was in a bad way emotionally. And while he had no problem being a crutch, somehow that situation turned into a whole lot more than that, at least for him. It had obviously not been an issue for True. She was well versed, just like he was, in loving them and leaving them. On her part, there was never any loving them, though. Sis knew how to stick and move. She perfected it. before she fell in love with Big Wood. Their little fling was over before it even really got started good. But the feelings weren't as easy to shake for Bosch. And he was not happy about it. Big Wood had told that man to walk away. And he had, but True would always have his heart. So much so that it almost cost him his life. Thank God Big Wood was a man about his business. He had the opportunity to save Bosch's life, and he took it. As a result, Big Wood would never, ever have to worry about Bosch crossing the line with True. It was going to be extremely difficult for him to continue as an employee for the Lopez organization, though. He'd been a lieutenant under Stacks who reported directly to True, but he'd earned a promotion to general. In the Lopez organization, Stacks was being promoted to head general. He'd be taking Big Nate's current position, which meant he'd continue reporting to True, but he'd also be reporting to Javier, the right hand of the Lopez kingpin, Emmanuel Manny Lopez, making his current position vacant and the one that Bosch would be assuming. If he accepted, he'd be reporting directly to True. And that's why Stacks was so concerned when Saint offered Bosch a position in the St. James organization. And Bosch didn't readily accept it. Saint didn't offer him any position. He'd offered him a better one, head general in the St. James organization. Bosch needed distance. He was a man of his word. He'd shown that he could absolutely be trusted. But all is fair in love and war. And True was a temptation that could be a dream and a nightmare. When Stacks questioned Bosch about his hesitation at the round table when Saint made his job offer, Bosch had told him that he should have known exactly why he hadn't readily accepted the job offer. He said, now that the men who preyed on her, kidnapped and trafficked her, and most of the men who were involved are dead or in jail, she can finally breathe easier. But she's not out of the woods yet. I made her a promise, and I intend to keep it. I let her down when I accepted that job in Denver, protecting True. She had a setback. I've finally gotten her back to where she was when I left, until all of the men who she's identified have been handled. Or there's someone else who she trusts, who can keep her safe in my place. I'm staying put. Stacks said, what about her uncle? Why he can't do it? Bosch said, I'm the only one who's been there with her every step of the way. I was there while she recovered physically. I was there when she gave birth to her son. I was the one who did immersion therapy with her and helped her leave her house without crashing out. You gotta promise me that if anybody asks you anything about the delay in my decision, no matter what they say or assume, you won't correct them. Nobody can know. Stacks said, I know that. We've been over this. I won't tell her so. Not even Wood, because I'm sure he's gonna ask. But I suggest you tell Saint so he doesn't give your position away. This isn't an opportunity you want to pass up. You at least want to ensure that it's still there when she and you are ready. But the first opportunity you get out of this. The last thing you need is for this girl to become permanently attached to you. And as Stacks walked away, a familiar laugh caught Bosch's attention. He looked up and saw True in Big Wood's arms. He let her go, and then Bosch and True locked eyes. She raised one eyebrow, and Bosch looked away. This was going to be hard.
A lot of pretty fella, tatted real bad, with a cartel sway, hands hanging on my ass, and I know you see me watching. Then I know you see me watching, dog. Then I know you see me watching. Then I know you see me watching, dog.
When Diego Morales, also known as Stacks, left the round table after his conversation with Bosch, he made a beeline for his brand new fiancée, Rennie Johnson. She was sick of Texas, and since it was almost time for her to head back to Massachusetts to wrap up her doctoral program in biochemistry at MIT, they planned to spend some well-deserved and well-overdue weeks enjoying one another's company anywhere but Texas. There was absolutely no way she would miss the Queen Mother and Idra's engagement party in Puerto Rico. It would be the first time she'd be back at Bellamy's, since she'd beaten the snot out of Layla and her whole crew. So the plan was simple. What could go wrong? When Stacks arrived at the family complex in Denton, Rennie would have all of her stuff packed up, and everything she had there with her in Dallas would be shipped back to school, while she and Stacks enjoyed several weeks of freedom, fun, flights, and foolery before she headed back to school and he headed to his new role as head general of the Lopez organization. She'd continue in her role as the Five Families chemist, and upon graduation, she'd be Dr. Johnson, and soon after become Mrs. Morales. She'd relocate to Puerto Rico with her new husband, where she would continue her work for the Five Families and continue collaborating with the Tanaka Enterprises chemist from Japan, under the leadership and mentorship of the Queen Mother. But first, they'd head to Puerto Rico and celebrate the engagement of the woman who'd become a second mother to Rennie, Bella Baptiste St. James, soon to be Charles. Everything seemed to be going as planned. When Sachs arrived at the family complex in Denton, Rennie was saying her final goodbyes to her nephews and her niece. She promised that she would see them again soon. Sachs loaded her suitcases in the trunk, and then they headed to the Lopez safe house where he'd been staying so that he could collect his things before they headed to the Lopez airstrip. Before they got to the safe house, though, they were pulled over by local law enforcement. Like any other gangster worth his weight in salt, Stacks was carrying. And like most gangsters, he had his pistol on his lap while he was driving. And as soon as Rennie saw the blue lights, she snatched that pistol off her man's lap and started stuffing it in her purse. Stacks looked at Rennie like she was crazy, snatched the pistol out of her hand, and put it on the console, because there was absolutely no need for her to conceal his legally owned and registered firearm. He would never get caught riding dirty, and any pistol he kept on his person on a regular basis was registered in his name, and he was never armed in a state where he wasn't licensed to carry. When the pair of cops made their way to the vehicle, one to the driver's side and one to the passenger, they both saw the pistol on the console and unholstered their own. Sachs had already turned the vehicle off, placed the keys on the console next to the pistol, had both his hands on the steering wheel, and Rennie had both her hands in the air. When officers had them step out of the vehicle, they complied without protest. And when the officers asked whose pistol it was, they both said, "It's mine." And as a result, they were both detained. And Stacks was pissed. He had failed to tell Rennie that the gun was legit, but he'd figured that she would have known. In the back seat of the patrol car, Stacks had informed the officers and Rennie of that fact. Rennie breathed a sigh of relief, but the officers were quiet. And then Stacks knew that this was about something else. When Rennie said, "This is why I hate Texas. Come here on vacation, leave on probation," one of the officers said, "We don't give probation for first-degree murder." There was no doubt in either of their minds that it was definitely about something else. And when they arrived at the station and were placed in separate interrogation rooms, he was informed by a detective that his failure to signal his right turn was probable cause for the stop. The firearm on the console was reasonable suspicion to run the name of his passenger. And they'd both been detained not because of his registered and licensed firearm, but because Renea Johnson's DNA was in CODIS and it had been found on the scene of a presumed suicide. Add the M and the S. And they had reason to believe that things were not what they seemed. When the detective went to question Sachs, his only response was, "I'ma need my lawyer." And having nothing to hold him on, several hours later, Stacks was released and Rennie was not. When he left the station, his first call was to LJ and his second was to his boss and Rennie's best friend, True. LJ sent the lawyer and True guffawed. She said, "Now you know Rennie a rider and she don't play about you. Clean, dirty. She wouldn't care if that joint had bodies. And she ain't a bit more worried about going to jail than the man on the moon. It's more likely that she'll be institutionalized because the girl is certifiable." When Stacks asked if he should send his lawyer, True said, "No, Rennie knows what to do. And the Johnson family attorney has been down this road with Rennie a time or two."
She ain't just pretty, she precious. Was broken when she met me, now I'm up and she still here. Ain't no question if she loyal, she didn't cry behind that wheel. Took that charge, held it down, never folded, never squealed. Even fuck me when I'm dead inside, like baby, keep it real. She the type to roll my blunt, clean my pistol, count the racks. Got her own bag too, she don't never need to ask.
Anya K. Baptiste, formerly Hobbs, had the worst hangover she'd ever had in her life. To be honest, she never drunk as much as she drunk the night before. She was supposed to have been celebrating her mother and her future stepfather's engagement, but she was celebrating her freedom. She'd been divorced for months, but now that everything was out in the open and neither her ex-husband or his lover were a factor anymore. She was ready to implement her plans to have the best hot girl summer, fall, winter, spring, and following summer ever known to man. She'd only ever voluntarily been with one man, her ex-husband, and her goal was to change that. Quickly, efficiently, and rather enjoyably. And instead of letting these niggas play with her, she was gonna play with them. She hadn't even been inside a club since her college days, when the Deaf Student Alliance had thrown a party at a club where all of the attendees were barefoot so that they could feel the vibration of the music and do a horrible job of dancing completely offbeat, without judgment, with her mother serving as queenpin of the Baptiste organization and her brother serving as kingpin of the St. James organization. She'd been locked down for months. Not that it had occurred to her to get out in the streets, but now that it had, and the opportunity had presented itself, she'd taken full advantage of it. The minute the old heads called it a night, she'd shown her whole and entire behind. While it wasn't necessary, she still had security, and since she had a driver, she didn't need to worry about how much she imbibed. She'd hoped that Easy would hang around, and she could throw herself at him. But he'd somehow conveniently found something else that he wanted to do with his time. So he wasn't there to see the spectacle or to participate in her planned shenanigans. She didn't remember everything that had happened the night before, and she had no idea how on earth it was possible that she was waking up in her own bed back in Texas. But she knew for a fact that she hadn't gotten any. And that was the second reason why she was pissed off. The first one was that her phone was incessantly ringing. That was why the lights were flashing in her bedroom. As a deaf person, she needed all the indications that she could get, that there was something that required her attention, her children, her phone, and her doorbell all being some of them. When she looked at the caller ID of her phone, she was annoyed to see that it was her deceased ex-husband's sister, Celeste. When Anya answered the FaceTime, Celeste, who was also deaf, immediately signed, asking her about plans for Ron's funeral. And Anya signed, that would be on whomever is his next of kin. Celeste signed, RJ and River K are his next of kin. Anya signed, no, they're the beneficiaries of his estate. Since they are minors, and both of his parents are deceased, his next of kin would be his adult siblings. I guess that would mean that you and Rudy are responsible for how your brother is laid to rest. When Celeste asked how they were supposed to pay for his funeral, Anya signed, use a policy, I guess. Again, this isn't my issue to solve. Celeste signed, of course he had policies. We've already established that. If I understand correctly, your children are the beneficiaries. Your divorce decree made you the executor of those funds while they are minors. I'm calling you because that means you're pulling the purse strings. Anya signed, I think you misunderstood my gestures. I did not ask if Ron had policies. I suggested that you and Rudy use the funds from the policies that you all had on him, ones for which you all are the beneficiaries. Celeste signed that she and Rudy did not have any policies on Ron, and Anya just stared at Celeste. So Celeste just stared at Anya. Then realizing Anya was done signing, Celeste took a deep breath, closed and opened her eyes. Then she signed, are you telling me that you are choosing not to bury the father of your children? Anya signed, I'm telling you that the money my children inherited will be used to care for them. Celeste signed, I heard that you are getting millions. Anya signed, you couldn't have heard that because you're deaf. Whatever my children are inheriting, whether it be $1 or $10 million, not a dime of it will be spent to bury your brother. Now, again, I'm sorry for your loss. Let me know who got the body, though, and I'll be sure to send a bouquet of flowers out of my own money. Angela Lorraine Spencer Washington St. James, wife of Quincy Anders St. James IV, mother of Michael Melissa Angel, Isla Quincy V, also known as V, Denver, and Dallas. Those last four were sets of twins. Absolutely had her hands full on everything from running her hair and skincare brand Vibrantly You without a chief of operations or a business attorney, collaborating with LJ to tighten the reins within the Notorious Five Families, identifying more lanes for legitimate business so that her children would have other options other than going into the family's illegitimate business. Add to that being a wife and the mother of 7, 5 of whom were at home, while Michael was in St. Lucia training to become head of the Charles organization, while secretly working for the Notorious Five Families and the Feds as the tech genius only known by the moniker the Anteater, also known as him. And since he was only 16 years old, he was also finishing high school remotely. Her oldest daughter, Melissa, had returned to her boarding school in North Carolina called The Light, where she, at 16, was finishing high school while also perfecting her command of her spiritual gifts, running a nonprofit where she used those spiritual gifts called God's Favor, and preparing for her upcoming Sweet 16 party to rival all other Sweet 16 parties. And both of her 16-year-olds were in love. Angela was absolutely overwhelmed when LJ entered Angela's office at the Vibrantly You headquarters. He'd assumed that the attitude she'd given him was a result of the fact that he'd interrupted her work. She had a huge stack of resumes on her desk for both the COO position and prospective new business attorneys. And her face was all screwed up. So when she looked up and rolled her eyes after he said, "What up, shawty?" LJ said, "Bad time?" Angela said, "No. I just got so much on my mind, it's ridiculous. I can't focus. I might as well just give up." LJ said, "Let's kick it." Angela said, "I'd rather not." LJ said, "So you'd rather just let it run around in your head, keep you from getting anything accomplished, than talk to your oldest and closest friend? Makes sense." Angela said, "Some things are my burden to bear alone. You can't solve everything, LJ." LJ said, "When since I stopped being a good sounding board, though?" Angela said, "When you stopped being my safe place and became my coworker. I can't continue to rely on you personally." LJ said, "So because we working together on Five Family business, we can't be friends no more? That's crazy." Angela said, "We will always be friends. But your ex-wife, she said a lot of things. A lot of it was hurtful, and a lot of it was true. I've always leaned on you, and you've always been right there for me to lean on." LJ said, "What's wrong with that? I don't see the issue." Angela said, "The issue is that I'm Q's problem now. He should be the one that I lean on. I should be talking to him about the issues I'm having, not another man, friend or not." LJ asked, "Why aren't you?" Angela said, "That's a story for another day, a story that I won't be sharing with you. Sometimes who you are can be a gift and a curse." LJ said, "Well, damn, shawty, way to make a nigga feel good about himself." Angela said, "I don't mean it like that. Relying on you can be a lifesaver in one season and a crutch in the next. You have been everything for everybody, especially me."
If Angela's not safe, nobody's safe.
LJ chuckled and Angela said, "I'm serious. I guarantee when you said your prayers this morning, you prayed for everybody but you. Me, Q, our children, Mom Brenda, everybody in Q's family, R3, Lena, Anders, Mom Joyce. Hell, you probably prayed for Regina and everybody you know and don't know in the Five Families." LJ said, "That just proves that you know me. What's wrong with that?" Angela said, "Well, I pray that you get everything you need."
I pray the love you gave out freely find its way back to you multiplied, and you realize losing some people was really God's protection.
In a hotel room in Atlanta, it's after 11 p.m., and Regina Johnson just spent 34 of the last 40 minutes vomiting all of her emotions all over her psychiatrist, Dr. Miranda Lopez. Lawrence Johnson Jr.'s, aka LJ's, ex-wife was fit to be tied. Dr. Miranda Lopez had agreed to give her a few minutes of her time, and those few minutes had turned into nearly an hour. And Dr. Miranda was trying to remain professional, but she couldn't help but ask, "Regina, is your ego bruised or is this about something else?" Regina said, "You are not listening. He didn't even see me. He was too busy staring into the eyes of that same heifer from..." Dr. Miranda couldn't take it anymore. She said, "Regina, if you want to gossip, you need to call a friend." Regina said, "Clearly, I don't have any. And this ain't about my ego or about gossip." Dr. Miranda asked, "Then what is it about?" Regina said, "It's about the way he was looking at her. It was like the whole world had stopped. Like they were the only two people left in it. Like they were the only people standing there because they were in the way. And the hostess had to squeeze me and my dinner companion around them just to seat us. And neither of them even looked up." He was whispering something. She was giving him her full, undivided attention. And I was staring a damn hole in the side of his head, and he clearly didn't feel it. Dr. Miranda said, and Regina cut off saying, and there was once a time when that man felt me into a room. No matter what he was doing, who he was talking to, or why. His head spun around, our eyes locked, because we were connected to one another. And now, Dr. Miranda cut her off and said, and now the connection is severed because you filed divorce papers. Regina said it shouldn't have been that easy. And their connection shouldn't have been so palpable. Have you ever been in the presence of two people who were so deeply connected that it feels like if you get too close, you'll be drawn into by their magnetism? Dr. Miranda said, yes. Regina kept right on talking. I've felt that way when I've been around Angela and Q, around Donovan and your sister. I spent damn near 20 years of my life with LJ, and I have never felt that pull. He was present. He was always available, reliable, dependable. But it was like it was obligatory, routine, commitment, but it was absent. When Regina stopped, Dr. Miranda had to ask, absent what? The magnetism? Regina said, the power. To hell with magnetism. There was power between them. I could see it, feel it. The air was electric with it. Dr. Miranda asked, do you think you might be exaggerating a little? Regina said, no. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell at you. No, everybody could feel it. The hostess commented about feeling the energy emanating from them. The potential new client that I came to Atlanta to meet said that her deceased husband used to look at her the same way that LJ was looking at that woman. She said she felt like she was in a vortex and being sucked in, and there was no place in the world she ever wanted to be. She said she wouldn't remarry unless she felt like that again. And then the hostess said that she prayed that God would send her a man who looked at her like that. Then Dr. Miranda stopped being so annoyed, went back in her professional bag and asked, and what were you thinking, Regina? How are you feeling? Regina said, like the man that I'd loved for most of my life had never loved me like that. That the same man who had promised me forever had been standing right next to me and I didn't even exist because I never existed. Dr. Miranda said, once again, I have to caution you about exaggerating. Regina said, I never existed in his world like that. He never gave me that kind of energy. And it wasn't because he didn't have it to give, but because it was never meant for me. It wasn't mine. He wasn't mine.